So before you tonight, we have a proposed amendment of Chapter 5 of the Zoning Code, which happens to be our flood hazards areas chapter. I just wanted to start by identifying a couple of bodies of water that flow through the city of Moscow that have mapped 100-year floodplains or special flood hazard areas. To the north, you have Paradise Creek, and to the south, you have the South Fork of the Palouse River. And the blue on your screen represents not necessarily the flood channel, but the 100-year floodplain in the area. And I always like to take this opportunity to point out, even though this has no bearing on the amendments tonight, about a couple years ago we had a letter of map revision that ended up remapping a area that extended into downtown, but it was for the university's recreation center project, and they had a daylighting project for Paradise Creek, and the result of that was about 80 to 90 properties ended up being removed from the special flood hazard area or 100-year floodplain. And so what that means is they're no longer required to carry flood insurance on the property, and the 100-year floodplain doesn't extend onto those properties. So just to point that out here, this is the revised map, and that's what it looked like before. So we had a number of properties that ended up, even the 100-year floodplains extends all the way to some properties on the west side of Main Street previously. So that was a big thing for the Moscow and University area at the time. And that brings us to what's actually contained within Chapter 5, our flood hazard areas section. What that does is provides regulations for all development within the 100-year floodplain. And so within that chapter, there's methods for reducing flood loss. It also describes and lays out the responsibilities of the floodplain administrator, which happens to be the zoning administrator in our department. Also lays out an appeals and variance process for floodplain variances and applications, and also has some construction requirements for new or substantial improved structures within the special flood hazard area, whether they be residential or non-residential construction. And just to give you a little bit of background about why we're here tonight, we were contacted in early 2015 by Idaho Department of Water Resources, our state floodplain coordinator, and they let us know that we were coming around that 10-year mark for a floodplain ordinance review. The National Flood Insurance Program, which we're a part of since 2003, reviews that about every 10 years. We're about year 11 right now. Our last review was back in 2004, and then the National Flood Insurance Program we've been a member in since, I believe, 2004. And what that does is allows federally backed flood insurance for all structures within the city of Moscow, whether they're in the floodplain or not in the floodplain. You can happen to be not in the floodplain and still carry flood insurance on your property if you want. And the city goes above and beyond the typical requirements of that program, and we earn a 15% reduction citywide in rates of flood insurance. And so all citizens that are wanting to have flood insurance on their property right away just get a 15% reduction because of the things we do to go above and beyond as part of the program. It also requires certain minimum requirements, and that's why the state floodplain coordinator contacted us and let us know that we need to make some changes with our current ordinance. So in April of this year, they provided feedback, and a lot of the updated just needed to be current language that exists within the program. And so they've tweaked some of that language, and it's just to bring it up to date with their current regulations. There's a little bit of slight restructuring that eliminated some redundancies. We covered construction regulations for residential and non-residential, and we duplicated those twice. And so a lot of this is restructuring and then making the document a lot more user-friendly to staff as well as the public who's trying to interpret it. Also had some definitions. A lot of this is definitions that were included within our ordinance, but we didn't define in the definitions section. So we've added these definitions, and we've also added some definitions which provide clarity. Maybe there's a term that's used in other definitions that you need to add another definition in order to make that a little clearer. We also had some state code references that needed to be updated. This was previously in Local Land Use Planning Act on the state statutes, and it shifted into a hazard section within the state code. Also had correct rate studies that needed to be amended. We had a previous rate study from back in '82 that was still cited in our ordinance. We needed to update that to our 2002 study, which is the most current. We also needed to add some variance and appeal procedures specifically for developments in the 100-year floodplain. Previously, we had just directed people to the variance and appeal section of the city code, which is really general. We also needed to update manufactured homes, just add a little bit of slight language with manufactured homes. Instead of going up to the base flood elevation, elevate those up to the flood hazard elevation. And then our subdivision standards, currently the floodplain regulations are within a subdivision section, and we're just relocating those to the floodplain ordinance for a centralized location, and so you don't have to go to multiple places to get those requirements. So we've made all the required changes required by IDWR, and in September 2015 they reviewed and confirmed that they met all the requirements of the NFIP program. Planning and Zoning Commission conducted a public hearing that happened October 14th, 2015, and they recommended approval of the ordinance as presented to City Council. And staff's recommendation tonight is to conduct a public hearing, and after considering any testimony, approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and then it'd be read by title and published by summary. And I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for Walter?
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, on a couple of slides before, you had a thing called correct rate study in the middle right there. And you mentioned 2002. What rates are you talking about?
It's the flood insurance rate study, so that's the latest study where they define where the 100-year floodplain is and map out the whole channel. And it just happened to be 2002 is the last time we had a rate study done on Moscow, and so that's our current map.
And that was done after the rec center work and the creek down around the U of I that changed downtown?
The rate study was from 2002. We had a letter of map revision. So you still have the 2002 rate. It just revises that portion of the 2002 rate study. So we're still at 2002.
Okay.
They've just submitted a 2013 letter of map revision, and it just amends that one, the one area there that I referred to earlier.
So if I'm buying flood insurance, whether I'm inside or outside of a flood area as shown on the map, my rates are set back in 2002.
Correct.
Got it. And if I may, on another similar topic, if you go back to your mapping of the flood areas, that one. Years ago, and this may be for Les and Bill or yourself, Mike. Years ago, there was a large channel put in right next to Joseph and the ball fields in that area. Did that change the flood mapping any, or is it just, how does that relate to that large area that we've got in the floodplain? And the one I'm pointing to, and just for, I don't know whether people can see the pointer on the TV. It lies between, what is that, 6th and Joseph, or 6th and White Avenue, looks like.
Bill, you want to answer that?
Yes. The overflow channel that was constructed along Mountain View, is that the structure you're referring to? That was constructed after the 96, 97 flood events and was constructed in order to try to relieve flooding that was happening back on Meadow Street at that point in time. Joseph Street Bridge had not been replaced and was a fairly significant flow restriction along that section of the channel. And so that overflow was constructed. It picks up just at about 7th Street. It conveys water through the channel and discharges to a underground culvert that then discharges near Fire Station 2 on the west side of Mountain View Road. That was constructed, I believe, in that 99 time frame. It was shortly after the 96, 97 flood events and was in place when the Corps came in and did another remapping effort in the 2002-2003 time period. So it is reflected in the floodplain maps. So it is incorporated within the floodplain as it currently is shown.
So what we've got is what we've got.
Correct.
Okay.
And if I might just clarify a couple things, the FIRM map, the flood insurance rate map, doesn't actually establish rates. It establishes the location of the floodplain. Those rates are changed by FEMA periodically. You may recall that there's been a fair amount of discussion among the Congress about establishing rates because of some of those large, costly events that have occurred over the last decade. It's so the FIS, which is the flood insurance study, and then the FIRMs, which are the flood insurance rate maps, indicate the areas that have mapped floodplains. It indicates the elevation of those flooding events. That information then is used and compared against the structure to see if the structure is above that elevation, then there's a certain rate, or if the structure is below that elevation, it has a higher rate. And those rates do fluctuate and are managed by FEMA through the NFIP program. But the study itself doesn't establish a rate. It establishes where the floodplains are and what the elevation of those flooding events are.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mike before I open this public hearing from council? Thank you, Mike. I'll open the public hearing. I will take testimony in favor or any testimony. Seeing nobody rush to the podium, I will close the public hearing. I'll let the council decide what we want to do here. Dan?
Your Honor, I'd make a motion that we approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that they be read by title and published by summary.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion by Dan and a second by John to approve the ordinance and under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read in by title and published by summary. And I will start to roll with Walter.
Aye.
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 Okay, we move on. And now we have an ordinance to read. Stating this is ordinance 2015-15? 16, okay. Ordinance number 2015-16, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, and Municipal Corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the amendment of a Moscow City Code Title IV, Chapter 5, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable, and providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law.